Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first AlphaNooner of 2025. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are very excited to be joined today for the first time by Wiz Buckley, founder of the Fallen Heroes Foundation. Very excited to kind of talk through what they're working on and their aims and how it relates to kind of psychedelic medicine and treatment and support for veterans, as well as, of course, Wiz, hear from you and your story. I know you have a very interesting one that a lot of people can at least relate to or find some insight into that I think is super helpful. I will mention for anyone who's joining, if you're here, one, hopefully you do not have a hangover from yesterday and you are feeling okay, but you're also welcome to throw any comments you have into the chat and we will get to them kind of towards the end. But with all that said, thanks so much, Wiz, for joining. Really appreciate it. And how are you feeling? How's your 2025 going so far?
Thanks, Mackenzie. I appreciate it. I'm feeling great, fired up and ready to go. Fortunately, because of psychedelics and healing, I'm not hungover or carrying anything like that. So yeah, I destroyed alcohol in my life, which was a very good thing. So I'm fired up and ready to go.
I think that's amazing. I think a lot of people have really, dropped or deprioritized alcohol for, things like psychedelics or even things like cannabis. We've talked about that in the past. I actually ran a poll and I think the majority of people in that poll were cannabis related, but I should have put mushrooms or I should have put something there and I didn't think of it as horrible. But that's awesome to hear. Love to hear it. Starting into a new year. Very, very exciting. I figured just because, of course, it's your first time on, would love to just sort of start with your background. I know, again, I mentioned you have a very interesting story, and then we'll kind of get into the work that you're doing as it relates to psychedelics.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was born and raised in South Jersey, South Philadelphia area, one of 6 Irish Catholic kids. So kind of a lower, middle class upbringing, typical Irish Catholic family. I was an altar boy and all boys Catholic high school, thanks mom and dad. And taught service above self and growing up on the Jersey Shore, the real one, not the MTV one.
Yes.
Love the beach, kind of grew up on the beach and also just wanted to serve my country and love the ocean, love the beach, and was always interested in aviation as well. So from earliest memories, youngest age I could remember, I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to fly fighter jets for our country and loving the ocean so much, kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup. That was the United States Navy for me. So because the United States Navy is aircraft carriers and you can fly fighter jets off of ships, and go see the world. So busted out of New Jersey and went to college down in Florida. And I was in Navy ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps. And when I graduated from college, I was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy. And I was lucky enough I'm really going to date myself, in 1991 to get selected for aviation. So I went through flight school in beautiful Kingsville, Texas. They don't put jet training bases in, downtown New York City. It's in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Selected F-18 Hornets, which at the time was and still is the premier Navy fighter jet. And after getting my wings of gold as a naval aviator, I was stationed out in California, where I deployed twice to Iraq on board the USS Abraham Lincoln, and then on board the USS Kitty Hawk. In the year 2000, I figured I'd win the lottery, and winning the lottery in the year 2000 was getting out and being a rich airline pilot, but also getting a job flying fighters part-time. So I hit the lottery. I got a job flying the F-18 Hornet for the Naval Reserve out of Fort Worth, Texas, and thought I won the lottery by getting a job with American Airlines. But unfortunately, the morning of September 11th, I was scheduled for my first flight for American Airlines, and kind of the rest is history. I saw the attacks unfolding on TV. I raced out to the air station, and we ended up manning a combat air patrol for the Southwest United States. So I went from potentially flying in an airliner that day to maybe even shooting one down.
My goodness.
So brief airline career. Up until that point, I had been trading on my own, kind of as a hobby. I had taught myself on active duty to trade stocks and then moved on to options. And, after getting furloughed from American Airlines, I'm like, oh boy, it was kind of a fun thing to do in the background to make a little extra money. Well, I had to step up and do it full time to pay the bills. And fortunately, I popped up on the radar of one of the largest volatility arbitrage firms in the United States, headquartered in the Chicago Board of Trade.
How did that happen? How did that connection get made? That's such a, how do they find you, or how does that come together?
Well, my immediate answer is God, right? Or the universe.
Sure.
That's how that happened, because there's no way in hell, I kind of did that on my own. But after I got furloughed from American, I started doing some consulting. I was working for a motivational company of fighter pilots, where we'd go into companies and give motivational speeches and help them improve their execution by teaching them how to debrief, or to plan, or to what we call red team. All sorts of concepts that I learned as a fighter pilot, that people in the business world go, "Oh my God, that's brilliant."
Yep.
And I'm like, wait, you don't do that you're not doing that. So I ended up getting assigned an event. It's funny because I was one of the junior speakers in this company, and I got to pick last, right? So the last pick for that month was an event over a weekend, which sucked. And it was also up in Wisconsin, which also sucked.
Oh.
Being from New Jersey, I don't think I could have pointed out Wisconsin on a map.
Sure.
But as it turned out, the reason it was over a weekend in Wisconsin was because it was a trading firm, right? They couldn't take a couple days during the week off to go do an offsite. They had to do it over a weekend. And it was within driving distance of Chicago, because the owner, one of the owners, had just had a baby, and she's like, I want to be close to home. So it was a couple hours up at Green Lake, Wisconsin.
Never heard of it, been, but I'm sure it's great.
Yeah. So it's funny because, before I go and do an event, I send like a 25-page, briefing document. I want to know everything about the company, your threats, your competitors, what the current market environment is. Also, this is my Bible.
Yeah.
So I show up to the event, and up on stage, it's funny. Sometimes I'll get off stage and people are like, "How long have you worked for us? I've never met you before." I'm like, "I don't work for you." But I bring that up because the document got sent back to me, like with two things filled out, like the date of the event and the location. I'm like, "Oh boy." And at the top it said, "Wow, these are all really good questions. We clearly we need help." So short story long, I got on the briefing call with the owners.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we're a volatility arbitrage firm, and we trade equity options, and equity options are, and they, were going to start telling me about options. I'm like, I trade options. I have a couple positions on right now. I rattled off my trades, and they're like, "Oh my God, seriously?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been trading options for a while." And they're like, "We're going to have a blast." So I went up and did the event with them, and it was awesome. It was really cool. I broke up the firm into different groups, the techies, the traders, finance, legal, HR, and I taught them how to debrief as a fighter pilot, right? We're nameless and rankless, man. We're pretty brutal with each other. It's not because we don't love each other. It's actually because we love each other that no punches are pulled. It's about improving execution, and because if we don't improve, we could wind up dead. And it was interesting because I had a bunch of other facilitators with me, other fighter pilots, so they were kind of running the breakout groups, and I walked around with the owners. And I'll never forget, at one point, the wife, it was a husband and wife team. She was furious. She was in the back of the room listening to one of the debriefs, and she's like, "Oh my God, why aren't we hearing this? And we could be doing so much better." And I had to actually pull them out into the hallway and tell them, like, "Whoa," I'm like, "One of the reasons you're not hearing this is because of how you're acting right now."
The emotional element versus the really like disciplined kind of. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
That's right. Or, not, as the flight lead, if I'm leading a flight, I lead the brief, I lead the planning session, I lead the brief, I lead the flight airborne, and I lead the debrief. And in the debrief, I start with what we call inside out criticism. I don't walk into a debrief and go, "Here's what you screwed up. Here's what you did wrong, blah, blah."
Sure.
I start the debrief with, "Hey folks, here's what I did wrong during the mission today." Boom, 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 boom. Then I go around the room and I go, "What do you have for me?"
Yeah.
So that lowers the barriers to communication. If the boss comes in the debrief and starts ripping people to shreds, nobody's going to say a thing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because, I had a blast. And one of the owners, the husband was from Jersey. I'm from Jersey. We were all the same age. So I really got along with them. And then, I hopped on an airplane and flew back to Fort Worth and thought I was on to the next event. And they called me like Monday morning and they're like, "Hey man, when do you start?" And I'm like, Oh, all right, cool. A couple, because we did follow on consulting, right? I could come back in and do some stuff. And they're like, no, 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 no. When do you start? And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? A volatility arbitrage firm? What? I don't even know what I do. And they're like, neither do we. But we just, when we see good people, we scoop them up and hire them. So I needed some flight time that month in my reserve squadron. So I actually grabbed a jet and flew up to Chicago, flew into Winnetka, right? The really rich airport.
Nice.
And I remember sitting on their, it looked like the Versailles, their mansion on the lake, Lake Michigan. And, I remember telling my folks and my wife afterwards, I'm like, they went mafia on me. I've never seen that many. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I've never seen
Yeah,
that
yeah,
much money in my life. I'm like, okay, well, here
yeah.
we go. So went to Chicago and, was up there for a couple of years, 34 years, I think. I helped build a hedge fund. I helped build the retail brokerage options house.
Wow.
I started the Options News Network, which is kind of the CNBC for options, because
Yeah.
at the time, John and Pete Najarian kind of paid lip service to options. Okay, but we were we'd shoot on the floor of the CBOE and the CBOT and gave retail traders a behind the scenes look at what was going on in the options community. But no offense to anybody from Chicago, but you can keep it, man.
The
I'm a
weather?
Navy guy. I'm a
Okay.
I'm a beach guy. I need sun. I need sand. Lake Michigan ain't a beach.
Yep.
We lived out in Naperville, out in Napertucky, out in one of the suburbs.
Sure.
And, in February, walking from Union Station to the Board of Trade was like a survival situation. I'm like, no thanks. So
Yeah.
after that, we moved down to I call it God's waiting room, down here to Boca Raton,
Oh,
where I
wow.
started my own financial training firm called Top Gun Options, where we teach people how to trade options. So that's kind of that gets us all the way up to the foundation.
Yeah, I do want to get into that. That's great. And I'm glad you're able to do kind of what you enjoy doing, but again, from a place where there is some sunshine that makes a big difference. But that's such a
Exactly.
crazy winding story. I do think, like you were saying, I think it's good that you had an interest in that. And I think that does help. But I do think you could almost work in any industry. And if you have that same discipline, that same ability to kind of connect and communicate, organize people, that can kind of really play through. That helps.
Yeah,
In any.
people can teach you how to build a widget, how to sell a widget, how to trade options, but leadership, discipline,
Yeah.
execution, accountability, those things unfortunately aren't too common in the
Yeah.
civilian community. But I can take a vet literally out of the military and train them pretty quick on something, and
Mhm.
they're going to execute. So I definitely prefer working with people where failure is not an option.
Yeah. No.
So yeah, to your point, yeah, it could work in any industry, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's also an interesting kind of personality type. I think the military, it's a lot of, high pressure a lot of the time, very organized, very hierarchical, but
Mhm.
also entrepreneurship and kind of doing your own thing and starting up. But I think it's that tolerance for maybe risk in some way, but having that disciplined approach. So it's kind of interesting to have that overlap. I have not seen that very much.
Well, yeah, and it's also about accountability, right? I
Accountability.
remember, I still do, speaking events and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and it's funny because I'll give my pitch on debriefing, and businesses have to debrief, and when I get off the stage, all the employees will swamp me like, "Hey, man, we need the debriefing here. Go talk to our bosses." And we call it nameless and rankless debriefing, because if you were an admiral and you and I flew together in the debriefing room, you're not an admiral. You were a pilot on that mission, right? That's exactly how I'm gonna treat you. Door
Yeah.
opens up, you're an admiral again. But in that debriefing room, it's funny. I call it Vegas and church, right? What goes on in the debriefing room is going to stay in here, and
Mhm.
it's a church-like environment where we can confess our sins and get everything off our chest. But it's funny because people in the business world will pull me aside and say, "Hey, Wiz, there's nothing nameless and rankless about this place. It's going to be
Mhm.
tough." I'm like, dude, I come from an environment where we wear rank on our shoulder.
Yep.
It couldn't be any more hierarchical to your
Yeah.
point. It is about rank, but
Yeah.
it should also tell you something that in the military, we're able to set those things aside
Yes.
for better purposes, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, door opens up again, you're an admiral, but in that debriefing room, it's all about improving our execution and getting better. And sometimes rank in that environment can actually hold you back.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. Not letting ego get in the way of your ultimate goal as a team, as a group, as a unit. I think that totally tracks.
You nailed it. It's interesting because as a fighter pilot, here's type A and then here's a fighter pilot. It makes
Yeah.
type A look like an introvert. You would
Yes.
think we'd be the last people in the world, to be able to pull our ego back. And, that's the exact opposite. This isn't Hollywood, right? If
Yeah.
you pulled any, maverick stuff in a real squadron, that would be your last flight. Fighter pilots actually can lower their ego because why? Because we want to win.
Yeah.
It hit me right between the eyes with
Sure.
how you can make me better so I can win and succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ego can get you killed.
That is so interesting. Well, I do want to talk about that later, maybe in terms of ego and psychedelics. I know that's a big thing, but I first want to get into kind of just No Fallen Heroes itself, how that kind of came to be, the aims and goals. Would love to hear kind of that element as well.
Yeah. So, No Fallen Heroes came about, interestingly enough, because of everything that happened to me, but mainly because of a market event. I had a deep throat in the White House in 2019, end of 2019. This buddy told me, he said, Wiz, there is a virus that escaped from a level 4 weapons facility, the only level 4 weapons lab in China. They are building crematoriums in this city. They're digging up the highways, dude. And we are freaking out. I'm like, oh my God. And I'll never forget this. So this was December, January-ish of 1920.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget to the day, it was January 22nd. Donald Trump was in Davos at the Beautiful People Conference, right? The annual Beautiful People Conference. And he was doing an interview with Joe Kiernan from CNBC. And I'll never forget. I think it was at the end of the interview. It was almost a throwaway question. Joe Kiernan was like, oh, wait, Mr. President, before you go, what's up with this China flu or this bug or something? And he's like, dumb question, Joe. Nobody asks dumb questions better than you. Believe me, not coming here. I trust Xi, got a great backswing, been to Mar-a-Lago. You're an idiot, not coming here. I looked into this camera and I said, he's lying. Get out. I said, buy puts on the S&P 500, get long volatility. And I think that was the same day or the day later when Ray Dalio, right, the world's largest hedge fund manager, you can put this on his tombstone. Cash is trash, right? And then one potato, two potato, we imploded and went straight down. We made, for our members, we made $2.5 million in a couple weeks on pounding the market into the dirt. And I always laugh when I hear the term smart money or legendary investor. Some of these smart money legendary investors were on CNBC crying. I mean, literally crying. Who was it? The other guy. We need to close the markets and, just take a break. I'm like, no, dude. Ain't no closing the markets, fella. I'm on the other side of your trades. I'll never forget this. Yeah. And what did they do the whole way down? Oh, this is a bottom. The bottoms, I'd be a buyer of stocks here. Misery loves company. Sure. They got it completely wrong. I got it. And I screenshotted it. He deleted this tweet, Donald Trump. I'd be a buyer of stocks here. Stocks are looking good. The next day, the Dow went down 3,000 points, I think. And I made like 75 grand at the open with my puts. Yeah. So we pounded the market into the dirt. What's this have to do with the foundation? I don't think I made that much money in my life in that short of a time. And around that time, I had lost my third F-18 brother to suicide. He was a groomsman in my wedding. He was a Marine. We got winged around the same time in Kingsville, Texas. Beautiful wife and 5 kids, and decided to check out. So, and along the way in my flying fighters, I lost 16 guys, not one combat loss. These were bad weather, stupidity, bad decisions, mechanical issues with the airplane. So not one combat loss, but 16 best friends, acquaintances, in-betweens that were gone. And then I didn't bring this up as part of my childhood, but, experienced some sexual trauma as a child. And then our middle sister, Monica, was killed by a drunk driver when she was 19. She was a freshman at Villanova University and was killed by a drunk driver. So I had some, significant childhood trauma that I carried into the military trauma. Sure. Then I went to Wall Street I left a fighter squadron where you trust the women and men in that organization with your life, or they're not part of that organization anymore. They're gone.
Yep.
I went to Wall Street where I couldn't trust somebody to watch my wallet if I went to the bathroom for 5 minutes. Very, very tough transition for me to go from that culture to that culture. I mean,
I know
these
that there's
guys.
always, oh, sorry, I was going to say, I know that there's always people who say that they want to go back or long to go back into active duty or war, and people are always confused by it. But I think it is that same thing. You are with people that you trust. They are your,
Correct.
brothers and sisters, all those things. But yeah, Wall Street definitely is in a lot of ways the opposite.
Oh my God, man! I was working with people who would push their own mother in front of a bus for $1. I mean, I just could not have been more disconnected from who I truly was underneath, and my family, my God, and it sucked. It found the booze, found some drugs, and it
Really gonna
was
say, I think, a lot of people
yeah.
cope, I think, with substances like that and get into worse places just because,
It is a bad environment, man. Just simply focused on the money. People wearing golf cleats to climb on top of each other and climb up the ladder. I'm like, nah, this ain't me.
Yeah.
So, crushing that. I wrote a book called COVID Crash: From Panic to Profit. So crushed it.
Mhm.
And around that time, I looked at my wife and I said, Susie, and my dad died years after my sister, and he died of a broken heart. He was just never the same. I remember sitting with my dad on the couch watching my kids playing.
Mhm.
And I remember looking at him. Of course, he knew what I was talking about. I looked at him and I said, Dad, how did you do it?
Yeah.
And he said, when they lowered Monica into the ground, I wanted to jump in with her. He's
Yeah.
like, but I had you. He's like, I had you guys.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what, Susie? Yeah, it'll be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. I said, let's after Eric Swede took his life, I said, let's start a foundation. Let's try and do something about veteran suicide.
That's great.
But what do you do? I mean, how do you keep somebody from killing themselves? I was like, do we buy suits, help them write a resume, help somebody pay their rent? I was literally at that point just going to throw, stuff against the wall to see what stuck.
Mhm.
And God and the universe provide, because around that time, a buddy of mine said, hey, man, there's a group of Navy SEALs and Special Forces veterans that go down to Mexico and they do psychedelic assisted therapy. And there's a really cool group going in a couple weeks. Do you want to go? And I said, man, go to Mexico and do drugs with Navy SEALs? That sounds like a great weekend. Sign me up.
Interesting.
I had no idea what I was in for. I mean, I had I got a couple of briefs beforehand. I was, but in the manual they gave us to prepare, I'd read a page of preparation. I'm like, okay, all right. And then there'd be a paragraph that says in bold, by the way, there's nothing that can prepare you for what you're going to experience. I'm like, oh my God, that doesn't sound good. I'd read another page and feel better. Then that paragraph would come again. I'm like, whoa, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
So I was prepared, but you cannot be prepared. So a couple weeks later, I don't know if folks have ever seen the movie or read the book Lone Survivor. It's with Mark Wahlberg. He's the actor, but he portrays a Navy SEAL who's on a 4-man team, and they go into Afghanistan. 3 of them get killed, and he's the only one who survives. So I went down to just south of San Diego to a retreat location called the Mission Within. Why just south of San Diego? Because if you do what we're going to talk about in San Diego, you're a felon. If you do it an hour south, it'll save and change your life. So go figure.
Yeah.
Thank you, big pharma, alcohol, and tobacco folks.
Yeah.
So Marcus Luttrell, also Jared Taylor, one of the founders of Black Rifle Coffee. He was a JTAC with some significant trauma. Another Navy SEAL who was a teammate with Marcus Luttrell. And then the 5th guy in our group, his name's Robert Gallery. He was an All-American at Iowa, a linebacker, and then played for the NFL 6 to 8 years. And you convoy from, San Diego. We all meet in San Diego and we hop in cars and we kind of convoy down. And I went down in the car with this guy, Robert Gallery. He's probably 6'7",
Oof,
300 pounds. I mean, he's a human iceberg.
sure.
But I got to tell you, driving in the car with him, he was death. He just looked like he was dead. He was gray, this big gray, sad looking thing. Let me fast forward a year later. I literally he bumped into me at a fundraiser in San Diego, and I didn't even recognize him. He was a completely different human being.
Yeah.
So the five of us jumped in our little caravan and we went down to the Mission Within, and we sat with a medicine called ibogaine. Now, iboga, Iboga,
Mhm.
iboga is the most powerful psychedelic on the planet. It's root bark from Gabon, Africa, from Central West Africa,
Mhm.
and it's got, I think, 12, 13 alkaloids in it. And one of the alkaloids is called ibogaine, and we can pull that out in the West, and you can just take the ibogaine portion of the iboga,
Mm.
and it is just it's I when I got home, I had to learn a new SAT word, ineffable.
Mm.
You can't, which means you can't put something into words. So the experience that we're going to talk about,
Mhm.
I just kind of chuckle sometimes because I fall infinitely short of what I actually experienced.
I think just
Uh,
really quickly, I think that is true. I think hearing from people who have had really powerful, impactful psychedelic experiences, it does feel like words fall short. They're unable to fully communicate it. But I think people who are looking at it from the outside, and even if you did not experience it yourself or can't really exactly connect 100% to what kind of the person's saying, I think you can see the results, like you're saying with your friend. So I think that's helpful because I know psychedelics aren't new, but I do think that they are kind of having a renaissance. And so I
yeah,
think that there's still some uncertainty around it. But I think that that's a helpful kind of gauge for people who maybe haven't done it themselves, but are,
yeah.
looking or have friends that have. So just adding that in.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because, yeah, anybody who tries, anybody who I debrief with, and they say the same thing. Like, dude, I feel like I'm not even capturing it. I'm like, I get it,
Yeah,
right? But it can help folks who have no clue what we're talking about to at least put it
of course.
somewhat into words.
Yeah.
So ibogaine, let's just start at a strategic level. It was a 12 to 14 hour, one of the most challenging experiences of my life. Having said that, it was without a doubt the most spiritual and life-saving and changing experience of my life. It was not fun. It's a workout. It was very intense, and it's not. People are like, "Oh, were you tripping, hallucinating?" With ibogaine, it's literally a waking dream, right? So you got your eye shades on,
Mhm.
something challenging, eye shades up. There's Marcus, there's JT, there's the nurses, there's the EKG, the heart monitor that I'm on. Okay, all right, eye shades back on. Movie, you're right back in it.
Wow.
So the ibogaine, it took about a half an hour maybe to start to take effect. But it's interesting because when I read in the manual, like, you might hear bees or a buzzing. I'm like, all right, well, that sounds weird.
Mhm.
But at about the 30-minute point, I'm lying there, with my eye shades on, and but I got it. I'm like, whoa, I'm getting what they meant by buzzing. But I'm old enough to remember old TVs. I'll tell you what I felt like. It was static. It was the medicine went in and was trying to tune me in to
Mm.
the right frequency. So this once it hit the right frequency, the experience began.
Interesting.
And man, it was just, I got back from this experience. I told my wife, I'm like, I never have to travel again. And she's like, why? Because I saw everything. I don't know if I can break this up into halves, but the first half was literally, I choose to use the word God,
Mhm.
was God giving me a tour, the
Wow.
medicine giving me a tour. I literally saw everything from the farthest reaches of the universe to the most minute atom
Mhm.
or quark or string on this planet. It was literally the medicine or God just saying, check this out.
Yeah.
You are a part of this, an incredibly special part of this. So
Yeah.
after the tour, And I was just like, man, and it's so funny because I'm like, this is the most incredible movie I've ever seen. The
Yeah,
production values are through the roof. Whoever did this deserves an Oscar. And now I
sure,
know who the Oscar winner is.
sure.
So after the tour, I was in space, but I was just
Mhm,
in the expanse of the universe,
mhm.
and the brightest, whitest light just was right there. And it emitted love, just absolute, and it was peace.
Mm.
And of course, I'm like, oh boy. I just kind of said,
Heaven it is.
I said,
Yeah,
are you God?
yeah.
And the whole rest of the experience, there was never a word. God doesn't
Mhm,
communicate with words, doesn't have to. It was just energy. But I
mhm,
got the answer, which was, of course, yes.
mhm.
And I just kind of, 52 years at that point, I just kind of evaporate. I just kind of disintegrate. I was in the
Yeah,
presence of, after I collected myself, I'm doubting Wiz, right? I said, can, can you give me a sign? And I'll never forget, around this massive energy in cursive handwriting, the word sign appeared and disappeared.
mm.
I was like, well, my
Literal?
God's got a sense of humor. I appreciate that.
That's awesome.
And the initial, I got to have a little Q&A session.
Yeah.
I said, where have you been? And God said, I've always been, and I will always be. Where have you been? And it was said very lovingly. It was just very like, I've always been here,
Yeah,
son, welcome back. Where have you
yeah,
been? Type of thing.
yeah, yeah.
And it was just so cool. And then I got stuck in a little bit of a loop with God. And this is so funny because I said, you've always been. I said, who made you? And throughout this experience, God was so loving and patient and kind.
Mm,
He said, I have always been and I always be. I said, no, I heard you.
mhm.
Who made you though? And very gently, God essentially just kind of grabbed me and lifted me up, and I exploded into infinity. I
Wow.
felt forever, which was only that moment. So I experienced what God meant when he said, I've always been, I've always be. I was allowed to experience that. I'm like, I
Infinity.
got it.
Wow.
um, and then it was a tour of childhood trauma,
Mhm.
adult. I was on my knee. I was crying after, I got stuck in the loop, and I was just so ashamed. I was ashamed of who I was and what I had become and the things I had done in my life. And God, I begged for forgiveness. And God, just with a wave, or it was gone. It was
Mm,
like, let me take this backpack you've been carrying. It's
mhm.
not yours. I got it. And I'll never forget this. He said, Matthew, I don't make imperfect things. He said, you're perfect. This I can help with, but everybody is perfect. Now let's go. Now that you're good, let me show you what you can do.
That's
And I'll never forget, Mackenzie. This will stay with me until I transition. At one point, my sister Monica appeared,
oh.
and she was perfect. She was angelic. She was just it was perfect. And my dad was
Oh.
was with her, and I since my sister had died, I couldn't remember what his smile looked. He just never smiled again. I couldn't remember, and he was smiling, and they were both. I was at peace. I hadn't felt that peace in decades. And
Amazing.
then they started to leave, and it was a horror to me. I was crying out,
Yeah.
"Don't leave! Don't leave me again!" And they came back, and they looked at me, and they smiled, and after I was at peace again, they started to leave again, but I followed them this time, and then I got it. They went into my daughter, they went into me, they went into the
Mm,
trees, the ocean, the sun, all of us, and
yeah.
I was at peace. They never left. They're here. They're here with you and I on this podcast right now, and it healed me. It death. There is no such thing as death. We are just here for this this blink of an eye moment. So I got to experience that, and it was just so much future and past, and I mean, God was just, it was incredible. So as part of the planning, I went in with 5 intentions for the medicine, and I went in with 5 questions for the medicine. And I don't know if this was towards the end or not or whatever, but I remember just going, I got it. I got all of it. I got all of it. But
That's awesome.
I remember going, wait, God, just, this is, thank you. I got one more question. I said, why Monica? Why so young? Why,
Yeah.
And God just simply said, I know, trust me. And I did, and I was healed. So, it was just absolutely incredible. I don't think I moved for 12 hours. I think, literally just doing like a one-man luge. It's all, I think one of the biggest decisions I made in my life was like rolling on my side at one point. It took like an hour to go a degree. So the next day, we call it a discovery day or a gray day, man. You laugh, you cry, you sleep, you do more of that. Robert was in the medicine for a good day and a half. And I know the doctors down there could tell we were a little worried that he was. And they all said, and now I know, but I was worried at the time. They're like, he's great. The medicine has a lot to do.
Yeah.
So we had like a day and a half. And then on the final day, we sat with a medicine called Bufo, which is toad. It's 5-MeO DMT.
Oh.
And they lied to me, Mackenzie, because they told, the way it was explained was, the ibogaines, it's an ass kicking, man. Get your mouth guard in and your chin strap on.
Sure.
The 5-MeO DMT is like 10, 15 minutes. It's like the icing on the cake. I'm like, oh, okay, hell, I can do that. 12, 14-hour ass kicking to 10 to 15 minutes. I got this.
Easy peasy.
This was without a doubt it made the ibogaine look tame. So it's interesting that they separate us in this big, beautiful house that overlooks the Pacific. Like we were doing the toad all the way on the top floor. And now I know why. It's because of me. And the rest of us waiting to go are like all the way down at the lowest level.
Yeah.
So Marcus went first and, came down, and they didn't want us interacting after we sat with the medicine until everybody went, mainly because of me again. So I was the second one. I went up there, and I'll never forget this big, they took all the mattresses out of the room except one facing the Pacific, and
beautiful,
with some flowers, and it was beautiful. And now I know why the room was cleared out. It was because of me. So I'm sitting on the bed, facing the Pacific, and I have a Navy SEAL at the head of the bed, and Doc Martine, who's the medical director of the Mission Within, right there, and then my guide next to me, Cynthia. And I ingested the 5-MeO DMT, and they had the eye shades ready to go up here, and you hold your breath and then you let it out, and they just kind of slid the eye shade down, and then they just kind of lowered me into the bed. And as I went backwards, there was no bed. I literally went from that moment to infinity, to just explode. It was like the Millennium Falcon. I went from hyperspace. It was sitting right there to white. And you never want to hear a pilot say this, but I have no fear of death anymore. I died. Now I know that might scare people. It was ego death, obviously. I'm speaking to you all right now, but I that was it.
Yeah.
And I was one with God, one with source, one with the universe. It was absolute. Again, like we talked about earlier, everything. It was not to, I hate using this word, but it was an infinite orgasm. It was absolute bliss. And it's interesting because it answered a question for me I didn't get from the ibogaine that I've always had. Was my sister bored or my dad bored? Like, are they in heaven, like looking at their watch going, where is everybody?
Yeah.
The only moment that ever exists is now.
Mhm.
When I was there was no past, there was no future. There was only that moment, and it was infinitely blissful.
Mm.
There wasn't any, wow, this bliss has been going on for 5 minutes. How much longer it's going to last.
Mm.
It's so hard to explain,
Sure.
but it was perfection. It
Yeah.
was heaven.
Yeah.
And I remember, God kind of doing do you understand? I'm like, man, I get it. There's nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. Everything's okay.
Yeah.
Even when things aren't okay, everything's fine. Right. But I kind of got all right, now you got it, but you got to go. Right. This isn't, you needed this to show you that everything's fine, but you gotta head back, man.
Sure.
So, like Apollo 13, the reentry
Oh, no. Tough.
was a little difficult. So
Yeah.
I I'm, I remember about 25% of this. The other 75 is what was told to me after. So I'll give you both.
Sure.
I remember trying to squeeze back into this imperfect vessel. I was just in the presence. I was one with God, one with source. My tinnitus was gone. The vision of my right eye was perfect. All my back and neck pains were gone. And I
Wow.
remember later that day, my guide explaining, she's like, Matthew, you are in the presence of God, of source. Of course, Jesus could heal with his touch. I mean, I'm like, wow, that does make sense. When I was there, everything was perfect.
Yeah.
So, but coming from perfect to this thing, I remember trying to come home,
Oh.
and there was still some regret or shame or trauma or drugs, or there was still a little black or whatever,
Mhm.
darkness. And I remember just yelling at the top of my lungs to try and force this stuff out. And I guess I was stuck a little bit because I don't remember this. This is what they told me. They're like, after that initial one, they're like, you took the biggest breath we've ever seen anybody in their life take, and you yelled at the top of your lungs you were in this fetal position.
Yeah.
And before we knew it, you flipped.
Oh.
Now, Mackenzie, I think in the 52 years I've been on the planet, maybe I tried to flip into a pool or something once or twice, and I
Yeah.
was landed on my back. I just can't do a flip.
Sure.
As a 52-year-old on a mattress in Mexico, they're like, before you went from yelling in the fetal position to you flipped. I don't remember it.
Sure.
So I remember hearing a couple breaths, like a deep breath. And I'm like, okay, that's not me. And I heard
Mhm.
another one, and I'm like, all right, well, I'll do that. Let me do a deep breath. And when I took a deep breath, I opened up my eyes, and all three of them were around the bed with tears streaming down their face. And they looked like they were terrified or had seen a ghost or something. They
Oh.
were crying. I'm like, first thing I said, I'm like, are you guys okay? And they're
Oh.
like, are you okay? I'm like, I've never felt better in my life. They're like, okay.
Whew.
But I, you fast a little bit in case you purge. So they have a bowl of fresh fruit there. But I laid on that bed for the next 30, 45 minutes, an hour, crying, tears of joy, not
Yeah.
sadness. And later at dinner, they kind of debriefed me. They're like, do you remember one of the first things you said? I said, no. And they said, you said you can't wait to tell Susie you love her forever because
Oh.
you know what forever means. I'm like,
Oh,
oh, that's
sweet moment.
great. I got an anniversary present for the rest of our lives together.
Yeah.
And they also said, you just kept looking at us and saying freedom, freedom. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, I think I do remember that. But that was that was just, I'm still integrating both of those experiences. But
Yeah.
the 5-MeO DMT experience, I am still, people, some people go and do it again. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I am good. That 5-MeO DMT is to me was a global thermonuclear device, and I'm good. I got it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've held space for people over the years that do toad. Some people don't even move. Some people giggle. Some people laugh and cry. Some guys get up and yell. I mean, I was a flipper. So it's interesting because that's why I hesitate sometimes to tell my story, because people are like, oh my God, I don't want to flip in a bed. I'm like, you probably won't. That's what I needed. Clearly, God was like, this guy needs
Do a
to
flip.
he needs to do a flip, and I guess I stuck the landing. It's so funny because
Oh, I love it.
I went into the medicine facing the Pacific, and when I came out, I'm like staring at the wall, and that's when they're like, "Yeah, you kind of did a flip."
I do
So I
love that
got
though.
home.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was gonna say in terms of it has like almost a symbolic thing of, flipping your perspective and change. I think there is something there as
Well, you
well.
know what, Mackenzie, my guide, this will really blow you away. She's
Mm,
like, "You are the." She's been doing this for decades. She's like, "This is the first time I've seen this
mm,
live." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "You transcended." Like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Well, you were in a V on the bed,
mhm.
and your hands and legs were moving in perfect symmetry." I'm like, "I couldn't do that if you paid me." She's
Sure.
like, "That's what you did." I actually ended up Googling it after I got home. I'm like, "Oh my God."
Mhm.
So they're like, it's rare to be seen or something, but they're like, nope, your arms and legs were moving in perfect symmetry. And then
Wow.
she's like, that's when you transcended. Then I saw you reborn. She's like, you went from transcending to the fetal position. She's
Mm,
like, you were born. She's like, I saw you born. You went from being with source to the fetal position to birth was
yeah,
your flip. I'm
sure.
like, oh my God. So that's why I am still integrating and getting downloads from that experience. There's like a video on YouTube about transcendence and 5-MeO DMT, and I'm like, oh my God, I was that guy. So it was incredible. It was a lot.
Yeah.
I we send, well, we'll go foundation now. So I got home from this and I'm like, this is how we're going to end veteran suicide. I
Yeah.
was healed, man. I was a drinker.
Mhm.
Up to 8 months, maybe even a year after the medicine, I couldn't even smell alcohol. I couldn't look at, if I saw a bottle of alcohol, it made me dry heave a little bit. It
Mhm.
was a complete system reset.
Yeah.
It scrubbed everything. I remember going to the airport. We got back to San Diego. I went to the airport. Everything was different. It's literally like God took a scrubbing brush and just scrubbed. Everything was brighter. I noticed birds or trees.
Yeah.
It was just so transformative. So I told my wife, I'm like, this is what we're doing. this
Yeah.
is this is how we're going to end veteran suicide. So No Fallen Heroes Foundation, we started that, and I was an aviator,
Mhm.
and I'm here with these special forces guys and the NFL player. There really wasn't anybody focused on the aviation side of the house because we have to hide our trauma.
Yeah.
I told you my 9/11 story. There was
Yeah.
my airline career, so I don't have to worry about the FAA. But most of my brothers and sisters flying airliners right now are hiding what's wrong with them, which
Yeah.
should maybe even scare the flying public here.
Yeah.
They Yeah, they have to hide their trauma and lie to the FAA.
Mhm.
So I got home and I said, let's help all veterans, because the organization I went with was only helping Navy SEALs.
Mhm.
And so there was a couple of foundations helping just combat vets or
Specific.
Navy SEALs. I'm like, man, my combat sorties over Iraq were a joke. It was the most boring flying I've done in my career. The toughest flying I did in my career was when I went to Top Gun. The toughest part about one of my combat sorties was landing aboard the ship. That was the scariest part. So I felt, like I can't call myself one of these people, but all veterans, everybody, but veterans, deserve to heal. When I got home and I started talking to some of my female, my sisters who served, they're like, yeah, man, my combat sorties were a joke too. But you know where I got my trauma whiz? From rape and sexual assault. I'm like, oh my God.
Mhm.
So I kicked over this rock, and there are women and unfortunately men who
Mhm.
were never even near the front lines. who experienced MST, military sexual trauma. Now, you expect the enemy to try and shoot and kill you or harm you. You don't expect your squadron mate. So the No Fallen Heroes Foundation, I went Big Ten. Veterans, any veteran experiencing trauma, depression, PTS. And then we also went a step further and said first responders. Because, a lot of veterans, when they take off their military uniform, first of all, they don't take off their trauma. Yeah. They go home, they become a first responder, state trooper, a fireman. Now you're adding to your trauma. I have a buddy who was a fire rescue down in Miami. He was a 20-year Marine. He said, Wiz, my fire rescue trauma makes my Marine trauma look pleasant. Really? What people can do to a child, or just. Yeah. So we decided No Fallen Heroes Foundation is going to help veterans, first responders, and then our third group, and equally as important, is family members. Yes. God bless my bride. She put up with me through some bad. So she served, and she's got trauma. And I'm pleased to say that 2 months after I got home and she saw what the medicine did for me, she's like, you know what? Maybe I should go sit with the medicine. So we help Gold Star moms and spouses and daughters and sons heal their traumas as well, because that's really not talked about too much, is the trauma that the folks on the home front can experience. So so we started that 3.5 years ago, and we've been doing healing retreats, and I'm pleased to announce, the initial couple of years I wasn't too happy because I'm having to hop on an airliner to fly to another country, Costa Rica, Mexico, to heal veterans who incurred trauma serving this one. Are you kidding me? This is insane. But thank you to the great voters in the states of Oregon and Colorado. Now these medicines are legal on a state level. So we've done healing retreats in Oregon. We've done retreats in Colorado. And I don't got a problem saying we've done retreats in Oklahoma and also in Sedona. We did a all-female Iboga retreat in Sedona. Now, if you're a Fed, please come raid one of these healing retreats. I invite you to. I'd never have to fundraise ever again in my life. But whether it's Texas or Oklahoma or Arizona, the places that we go to operate under, a spiritual banner. I tell people I'm a recovering Catholic. As a result of sitting with these medicines, I have never been more spiritual. I lost my faith for decades. What kind of God kills my sister and does all this stuff to me? Well, as a result of these medicines, I've never been more spiritual, not religious, but more spiritual. So, there are retreat places in the U.S. that are operating under a, religious freedom banner. No offense to Scientologists, and I love Tom Cruise, but if that's a religion, me sitting with a plant that God put on this planet for us to heal, that can be my religion. And there ain't no way Uncle Sam can tell me it's not. I'll see you in front of the Supreme Court. So that's our mission. That's No Fallen Heroes, and it puts a smile on my face. But it does and it doesn't. And here's where it doesn't. We're almost a victim of our own success, and I hate talking like that, because the more it gets out there, the more grant requests we get. And I haven't, we get a couple a day. I'll wake up and check my phone, and I'm like, oh my God, man. I haven't read a grant request from someone who was just full of shit, or every one of those things that I read brings a tear to my eye, or just makes me, I'm just so frustrated, because our only constraint is funding. A month ago, and I guess I should celebrate this, but I don't think they did this out of the kindness of their hearts, but the VA announced a $1.5 million study in the psychedelics over 5 years. Folks, the federal government spends $6 million a minute. So we got 15 seconds of funding over 5 years. If the VA had given the No Fallen Heroes Foundation $1.5 million, we probably could have cleared half of our list. So half of me is like, Wiz, you should celebrate it's journey of 1,000 miles, first step. I think they did it to shut guys like me up. Oh, the VA finally doing something. I think that's why they did it. To be brutally honest, they did it to say they're doing something, because the VA is a pill factory. One of the Navy SEALs that we went with one time, he was on 15 medications,
Yeah.
5 to wake up, 5 for lunch, 5 to go to bed. In 3 years, he hasn't taken a single medication. We've had another special forces operator. He showed me his brain scans from the VA, and they were dark and black and gray.
Yep.
And a couple months after the ibogaine, it was white. So I personally believe that these medicines, they're dragging their feet, is because of pharma and alcohol and tobacco. I was told this. I've been to DC a couple times to knock on the doors and literally walk the halls of Congress, and behind closed doors. It doesn't matter who the congressman was. I don't want to. Wiz, I love what you're doing, but you're going to have a problem with the big pharma and the alcohol and tobacco folks. And I'm like, what do you mean I am? Isn't that your job? So, I don't want to go down on a low note here, but there is absolutely no excuse for why these medicines are still Schedule 1. The definition of a Schedule 1 substance is no therapeutic use and a high risk of addiction. That is the actual definition of a cigarette or alcohol. 0 therapeutic use, and both of those will kill you. But typical government, right? Whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act, which caused inflation, or a Schedule 1 drug, they label things the exact opposite of what they are. These medicines it was the most therapeutic thing that I've done in my life, and it's anti-addictive. The heroin epidemic or the fentanyl crisis in this country could be solved in a weekend with ibogaine, period. There was a study where 85% of heroin addicts who sat with ibogaine once, the next morning they woke up, they had breakfast, they had no withdrawal or shakes or cravings, and they stopped following these people after 3 years, because if you do heroin after you haven't done it in 3 years, something else is wrong. But the ibogaine can give you a complete system reset. So, hopefully I'm bullish. JD Vance, our vice president-elect, was on Joe Rogan a couple months ago talking. Rogan had to school him on psychedelics for veterans, and he seemed genuinely interested. Like, I didn't know this. Pete Hegseth, love him or hate him, the Secretary of Defense nominee, was on the Sean Ryan podcast talking about psychedelics for veterans. And obviously, RFK Jr., the HHS secretary. If you haven't watched the clip, I strongly recommend, Google RFK Jr. psychedelics. He's got this like 3-minute answer where somebody asked him about psychedelics, and he said, I got to be honest with you, I'm a recovering alcoholic. So I thought it was just replacing one bad thing with another. And then he said, my wife took her own life. And he said, I lost my son too. He's like, he was done. And then he went to Peru. He sat with psychedelics, and I got my son back. So I can't be more pro psychedelics. So, it remains to be seen what happens in the next 4 years, but I have been more bullish. I'll tell you, Mackenzie, I got it wrong. When I would go to DC, I'm like, well, clearly the Democrats are already here. Hippies, drug rugs, mala beads, anti-war. My experience was it was the exact opposite. They were the ones that were pro pharma, and they pay lip service to psychedelics, but underneath, man, And now it's like the pro-war party, for God's sake. We're living in bizarro world, man. Things are flopping and switching around here, but I was wrong. I thought Democrats, 60s, don't trust the government or anybody over 30. I don't know what happened to those people, but it's the Republicans now that are like, maybe it's because it's veterans. Maybe it's because they're not hippies saying this stuff is great. Maybe because it is Navy fighter pilots and SEALs going, well, this helped me that they're listening. I don't care what the reason is. I'm just glad they're listening. So we'll see. I'm bullish on the next 5 years. And if the Republicans don't pick up the ball and run with it, I'm going to take a flamethrower to them too. So
that is fair. I think that's good. Either way, with any politician on either side or any third party, I guess even, you still have to be advocating to make it any progress, which is unfortunate because you're right. I think you have seen a lot of people have some good outcomes that are almost remarkable. Not in every case. There are risks and things like that, but being able to drop really bad habits or address kind of really complex mental health things like PTSD or eating disorders or all these different things. Hopefully, I think in time that kind of just reveals itself to be true and useful, not Schedule 1, all those things. But I think it still, unfortunately, does rely on people and people like you to be pushing that forward and kind of getting that message out. So I think that's super important. I do have one quick question here. Let me see if I can throw this your way. Speaking of kind of pharma and their relationship with psychedelics, Brian asked a good question. Thanks, Brian. Is there any one big pharma that has a veteran-friendly background more likely to adopt psychedelic therapies? M&A, any M&A avenue for adoption? I know it's hard.
Brian, that's a great question, man. I don't know of any. I have a buddy who. Let me give you a take on big pharma, and I'm going to tell you right now that I'm bipolar in this moment. I'm going to tell you how I feel as Wiz, and then I'm going to tell you how I feel as Gordon Gekko, especially since we're on AlphaNooner, right?
Sure.
Because Gordon Gekko didn't have a conscience; he was all about the money. My Gordon Gekko right now is buy the psychedelic stocks. MindMed, MNMD, Cybin just came out with some great. I think it was this morning. I was reading some great news about Cybin, CYBN. Atai is looking into ibogaine. I love Christian Angermeyer and Atai, and then Compass is kind of an also other one there. So I'm very bullish on the psychedelic drugs as the Gordon Gekko. Let me keep going as the Gordon Gekko. If you're Pfizer or Moderna or Eli Lilly and you're sitting on the top floor with your Wall Street Journal and your cigar reading about these publicly traded psychedelic companies and how, oh my God, with one dose they cured generalized anxiety disorder, you are not going to let that. You're going to swoop in when you're with your size 12 checkbook and go, yeah, that's. So the publicly traded psychedelic companies are just burning through cash. I mean, look at MAPS, then Lykos. It's not cheap doing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. So what's going to happen is all the big drug companies are watching. It's the Wild West right now. They're watching all the psychedelic stocks burn through their cash. And I call it the internet 1999. There's a Netscape and a pets.com and an Amazon and a Google. If you get the right two, you're rich. If you pick the wrong two, you're going to be broke. So I think these publicly traded psychedelic companies, if they keep going in the good direction and get good results, once they do the look at what we have, you're going to see breaking news. Pfizer just acquired MindMed in a whatever acquisition. They are not going to let these little companies, because there's no money in healing, folks. Spravato, the S-ketamine, 7 or what is it, 15% effective rate. When you're talking about 70-80% healing rates with some of the medicines I talked about, holy crap, it's literally a game changer. So that's my Gordon Gekko moment is with the pharmas, they're just going to scoop in. There's no way in how, and you can't sit here and say, well, Christian Angermeyer or the CEO of MindMed is going to say, no, we don't want to sell to you. Folks, staying with Gordon Gekko, as a CEO of a publicly traded company, you have a fiduciary duty to who? Not to veterans and healing, to your shareholders. So if somebody comes in with a big check, you're going to have to sell it. You have a legal obligation. So this is where I get bipolar, and I'll be Wiz for a second. That breaks my heart. So always remember this, folks. Healing is free. God put a fungus, a toad, a root bark on this planet for us to heal. It's free. Now, these guys and these gals with their lab coats and their beakers are going to take that fungus, change an atom and call it, ibogaine and try and charge 20 grand for it. But never forget that this stuff is free. It's technically free. So the next couple years is going to be insane in the psychedelic space. If you don't want to gamble, so to speak, with publicly traded psychedelic companies, look at the infrastructure, right? Sabra, SBRA is a great one. I'm currently in a private REIT. It's called Healing Realty Trust. Because at the end of the day, when, not if, these medicines are legal for therapeutic use, your doctor's not writing you a prescription for MDMA, good luck, take this at home. You're going to have to go And you're not going to go do it in your general practitioner's office sitting on a old examining table with wax paper. It's going to have to be a nice big room and some couches and, videotaped and a separate bathroom. So the infrastructure doesn't exist today for everything we're talking about. So the REIT that I'm in right now, and we're deciding whether or not we're going to go public someday, is buying up properties, existing properties, where around VA hospitals, around big hospital centers that have existing businesses in them that are cash flow positive. But we're going to eventually start repurposing those type of things because, 20, 30 years ago, there was no, urgent care now or dialysis centers. As things went along, the hospital said, no, we're pushing stuff out to a campus. The same thing's going to happen in the psychedelic space. What's the other one? I think it's AVR or AHR. I think it's AHR, American Healthcare or something. They went public in February at $10. I think they're up to 30. So the, kind of like, I don't trade Bitcoin. I trade the underlying technology, the foundation of it. Same thing with the psychedelics. Maybe not look at up here, look at the infrastructure underneath. Now, I know that was a long rambling answer to his question, but I don't know too many veterans at any of the drug companies that are doing this stuff.
Totally fair. I do think, kind of speaking to your answer a little bit, it is true that I think there's a lot of progress being made, and that shows up, I think, in some companies. Again, it's a little bit risky sometimes because it doesn't work out for certain companies. So I would say, of course, if you're out there, just again, a little heads up and reminder and warning, volatility could be out there, so just being careful and understanding your allocation is important. And then, interesting mix between the people who I think we're seeing those states come online. We're seeing people who use it recreationally. You're saying it's free for medical use as well. But I do think there is some benefits for the companies that are kind of pursuing it from an IP perspective. To me, I kind of view it as like you can, get corn or like some sort of vegetable or plant and grow it on your own, or you can go to the grocery store or cucumber that gives like English cucumber with those seeds and kind of really tailors what the experience is like. So either way, I think across the board we're seeing much movement towards psychedelics, which is great for the people that need it and use it. I do think, again, not some caution is required, but some, I guess, maybe respect for the impact that they can have is important as well, which again, I think ties into those centers. You're right, you would not be on the wax paper that you'd have a terrible trip and have a bad time, so who knows. All right, well, I see some in there as well. Seems like stocks are going well, having a good day today, which is awesome to see. Sounds like you need to be on more, which is awesome. Would love to have you on again. That's great. That's awesome.
I think we just we're moving the market. Look at us.
There you go. Love it. All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks for taking the time and kind of sharing your story. I do think we've given for Giving Friday to the foundation before, but I think we'd love to do that towards the end, which I guess that's tomorrow. Losing track of this week with the holiday and everything, but love to do that to kind of support the mission and the work that you're doing. So I think it's great to see the impact that psychedelics can have for veterans, for athletes, for first responders, all these different people. It's fantastic. All that said, Wiz, any final thoughts? Thanks so much again.
Thanks, Mackenzie. God bless and Happy New Year.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.